Hi everybody! If you're looking for a startup growth expert, I've got the perfect guy for you. Matt Lerner is the founder and CEO of Startup Core Strengths, a company that offers growth training and coaching to early stage founders. With 11 years at PayPal and almost 4 years at 500 startups, Matt is the perfect person to learn from when it comes to growing a startup. He believes that 10% of what you do drives 90% of your growth, and here is his advice on how to discover the 10% you should focus on. Enjoy this episode and don't forget to subscribe to our channels wherever you're watching or listening.
Welcome to The Product Show. Insightful interviews with founders and tech leaders sharing how they hack product growth.
Hi Matt, welcome to The Product Show.
Hello, good to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. So you're basically a startup growth expert. You're the founder of Startup Core Strengths. Before that, you spent 11 years at PayPal and almost 4 years at 500 startups. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and what exactly Startup Core Strengths does.
Yeah, sure thing. So, I spent most of my career in Silicon Valley. I worked for a few startups that you've never heard of that didn't do so well. And then, I joined PayPal in 2004 when it was still kind of scrappy and stayed there for 11 years. Moved to the UK and I became an early stage VC with 500 startups. Ended up investing in 35 companies, but I probably heard more than 500 pitches in those almost 4 years. And so as a person who spent my entire career doing marketing in Silicon Valley, to look at 500 different companies and how they were bringing their products to market and how they were thinking about marketing and who they were hiring, I saw a lot of people making a lot of mistakes. And the big ones are sort of like people trying to build a small version of like a big company marketing team and doing big company marketing stuff instead of when you're a startup, it's really you align the whole company around growth and you figure out how are we going to do this. And if you look at any successful startup and you go back, you see that like 90% of their growth came from a small number of things they did. And so much of it is just figuring out how are you going to grow? How are you going to work that puzzle? And I think a lot of people, it's still just sort of trial and error. Let's do a rebrand and let's try hiring someone and let's try Facebook ads. And they're not thoughtful and systematic in their search. Anyway, so I founded Startup Core Strengths to take companies, once the product is ready, as we were talking about earlier before the recording started, once their product is ready, once they know who their customers are and it's time to focus on marketing and help people sort of learn to work from first principles and align their company around finding the right routes to growth and finding like the 10% of stuff that's going to cause 90% of the results. So we run a virtual accelerator and we help companies at that stage, typically seed or Series A, to work through that piece of their growth, hire the right people, find their biggest levers, track the right metrics. I'm sort of getting ahead of myself, but that's what we do.
Fantastic. And before we go into details of how you help startups, let's discuss a little bit more your time at PayPal. So you spent there 11 years, starting as a marketing manager in 2004 and leaving as a director of marketing in 2015. So that's quite a journey. Tell me a bit more about the key lessons you learned there that gave you the foundation for becoming a startup growth expert and ultimately founding Startup Core Strengths. How much did it help you, the big company, to help the little guys?
Well, when I joined, it wasn't a big company. And I guess it was, but it was like a startup working in a big company. Let me just turn off my notifications here. And so I remember like one of my first weeks there, a guy named Dave McClure, who was my boss when I joined, I was like, are we allowed to do this? And can we do this? Is this against some policy? And he said, it's always better. It's easier to ask forgiveness than permission.
Right.
And so the first thing was already just kind of like, don't worry about what's the right process and following the rules, but think it through from first principles, figure out what makes sense. And a lot of the stuff we did at PayPal was nothing like marketing I'd ever done in my career before. It wasn't like things you're supposed to do. It was like, let's think about this problem and what we're trying to do and figure out what makes the most sense in this situation. So I guess the big lessons early on were like, work from first principles. Don't just do like what it says in the book. And it's better to seek forgiveness than permission. Like just go ahead and do it and take the risks. I think those were kind of the big ones. The other one, there were some really extraordinary people at PayPal, some really bright, talented people. And immediately being around those people and talking to them raised the level of my thinking. And there's this saying, they say you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And the other takeaway was like, don't spend my time with people who bring me down. Spend my time with people whose thinking is ahead of mine, people who are smarter than me, people who are bright and dynamic. And that's the way to up-level myself. And you can do that. You can be very thoughtful about which companies you join and who you choose to work with.
Right, amazing. And the way that you are doing marketing, as you describe it, sounds like almost the foundation of growth marketing. And like the term growth marketing for me, it's been like, what is growth marketing? Isn't marketing always been about growth? Is that like kind of a fancy new way to call marketing? So do you think there is any difference between growth marketing and marketing as we know it, or is just this a new way of doing marketing and the way we should be doing it in 2021?
Let's say in my many years at PayPal, I think I told you, I said this in the beginning, like with any startup, if you look back in hindsight, 90% of their growth came from 10% of the stuff they did. And the same was true at PayPal. Like the very first growth came from eBay sellers. And then after that, they started reaching out to web developers to get websites that were outside of eBay. And then they said, hey, most people are using shopping carts. So they went out to, the shopping, it was like Shopify, but before Shopify, like the popular shopping carts that people were using in 2005. And they, partnered with all of them. And then a bit of phone sales. That's pretty much drove, and then later, some SEO and things, but that pretty much drove all of PayPal's growth. That's not all we did though. Right. We redid the logo twice when I was there. Do you know how much it cost to change the logo in a big company? Literally millions of dollars and months of work. And the logos looked almost the same. Like the customer service reps had to have a little card on their desk to show them to tell the difference of whether it was the new logo or the old logo, so they would check their communications when they went out to customers. So people, if you look at a marketing budget, if you look at your marketing headcount in a big company with a lot of money, there's a ton of stuff in there that's never going to make a difference in your business if you're honest with yourself. And so I guess what I'd say is growth marketing is if you're in a tiny startup and you've got 9 months of runway and $500,000 in budget and 3 headcount, and you've got to get to 100,000 MRR, or you're not going to be able to raise your next round of financing, you can't afford to waste money or time on anything. So you have to be very smart and thoughtful about the work you're doing, and it has to have a direct and immediate impact on the growth of your business. So for me, that's what I'd say is growth marketing as a subset of marketing.
Right, perfect. Okay, and so let's go back to your time at 500 startups. So when you were there, you invested in 35 startups, but you just mentioned that you've made how many? 500?
I probably saw over 500 pitches, yeah.
So that's crazy. So I guess you kind of learned the way to spot the best and the worst in people. Right. So tell me, what are you looking for when meeting new teams, and what are you staying away from?
It was an incredible experience. So first of all, we were investing at seed stage, pre-seed stage. And the main lesson, I think, that we got from it. So I didn't come up with the investment thesis. I got hired into this organization, and the general partners, we had a few general partners who'd invested in multiple unicorns. They've been doing this for 5 or 10 years, and they backed companies like Grab and Udemy and Twilio and SendGrid. And so they could go back to their early meetings and they passed on TransferWise and Uber. They could have invested and they didn't, because at the time they thought those were bad investments. So they were able to go back to those early meetings and say, what did I know at the time? What was I thinking at the time? And the main thing they came back with is you really don't know. It's very hard to know. And so what we do in 500 Startups is we would invest in a lot of companies, and we know that at the end of the day, our portfolio returns, the majority of them would come from 5 or 10% of the companies in a fund. But those 5 or 10% of companies will end up being worth 50 times, 100 times, 400 times our initial investment. And that's enough to fund, the 90 to 95% of companies that don't turn out to be great investments. So basically what we were filtering, and the criteria we used to filter for our investments, were really clearly, specifically, the founders, the business model, and traction or the level of product market fit. And ultimately, the founder is probably, outside of luck, the founders are probably the biggest predictor. But they're also, it's very hard to spot. If a founder doesn't already have a track record, it's hard to know, who's going to be the next, Jeff Lawson or Jeff Bezos or any of these people. So you want to spend time with the founders, but what you're looking for is over time, in multiple meetings, how is their thinking changing? How are they taking in feedback? What's the speed they're moving at? And also, if they have previous history, either in this industry or as an entrepreneur, like what have they done in the past? Traction is a very good validator because, when you're investing in a company that does something in health tech that deals with a condition you don't have and you're not a doctor, like it's impossible to know, right? But if people are signing up for this product, using it all the time and telling their friends about it, that's really good validation that they built the right product, they found good routes to market, they have messaging that appeals to people, and they're delivering good experience. So traction is a really strong signal. And then business model is actually fairly straightforward. But I mean, you just look like making hardware and managing a supply chain, it's very low margin, it's hard work. Yeah. Selling a commodity product like deodorant or petrol that other people can sell, it's very hard work. It takes a long time to build a moat in an area like that. Whereas something like SaaS is an extremely profitable, high margin business model. It's just much easier to make money on a SaaS business. So we would just sort of try to stick to business models, marketplaces, and SaaS, and things that we knew worked.
Okay, and what do you think an early stage founder should never outsource? From the founders that you met, do you think many of them were doing a mistake to outsource key parts of growing the business that ultimately impacted their growth and the future of their company?
I guess if you go back to it, like especially early on, it's not so much like whether you can trust people to delegate or not, but realistically, your founders in the beginning are probably going to be the smartest, most motivated people in the company. Because until a company gets to a certain point, it's hard for them to attract world-class talent. So, the founder needs to make sure that they've always got their attention and their thinking on the most important things it takes to make a business go. So, business, if you strip back all the unnecessary stuff, is two things: a product or service, and distribution. So literally, if you don't have a good product or service and you don't have a way to get customers, you don't have a business. So I would start there and say, like the product, the founder needs to stay focused on that stuff until it's working, until they've got an organization around it. And even if you look at very big successful companies today, often the CEOs are still quite heavily involved in product and distribution.
Absolutely. So let's go back to startup core strengths and the five strengths that you believe form the growth core of a company. So these are message, metrics, focus, team, and process. So can you elaborate a little bit on each one of those and tell us why you think this is a winning formula?
Yeah. And this is a metaphor, core strength is what you'd learn in any sport, You're going to be a better golfer or skier or dancer if you've got strong abs and the strong hips. And there's these foundational things that everybody needs to be successful in sports and avoid injuries and stay healthy. So I find the same thing with startups, because as a VC, I would see and work with everything from a consumer meditation app to a meal delivery service to a B2B SaaS product that costs $5,000 a month and only sells to big corporations. And these are the things that no matter what you need. And so the message is understanding your user psychology. What's the progress they're trying to make in their life? What are they trying to do? Where are they looking for solutions? What fears and doubts do they have about potential solutions? Because if you can't speak to the customer in their language, you're not going to convert. Metrics, very simply, you get what you measure. and you've got to align the entire team around a small number of things and get them to do it, or else your business isn't going to grow. And that kind of brings to focus the idea of focus, which is if you've got, again, a small team of 5 people or 30 people, if you're trying to do too many things, you're going to do them all badly. And there are right and wrong things. There are right answers. So what you've got to do is build that focus where you align the product team, the marketing team, the sales team, the legal team, the biz dev team. They've all got to be focused on a small number of goals. It has to be the right stuff. Now, team, I don't think I need to explain this to you, right? A company is only as good as the people you can get around the table. That's kind of a cliche. But sometimes startups, the right team for a startup isn't necessarily the team you'd want to hire in a big company or in a late stage company. And so I think a lot of times people apply the wrong filters and aren't necessarily looking for the right things. So figuring out what it is, what's the hard stuff you need to do, and what are the right skills and abilities and kind of people you need to get in to build the startup. And then the process piece is a weird one. This is one where I think the world is still a couple of decades behind. So on the product management side, we got rid of waterfall. We started doing lean, agile sprints 20 years ago. But in marketing, it's still like hire a marketer, give them a budget, give me a 2-year plan. And that's just silly. In a startup, you don't know how much money you're going to need or what you're going to be doing for the next 2 years. So when we work with companies, we get them running growth sprints where they come up with ideas and they run experiments and they test out hypotheses and figure out what's going to be our big successful, routes to market, places we get customers, which messages are going to work, things like that. So we teach people to run weekly growth sprints.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Can you give us examples of, some of the growth sprints that you've run recently and some interesting findings from it?
I guess, yeah. Just very recently, right now I'm working with a company and it's a marketplace for business catering. And I think they were, what they've learned is recently is that people don't necessarily need to trust the marketplace. They need to trust that they're going to find good caterers. And so having messaging around, hey, we're this great marketplace, didn't do as well as messaging around, just giving them feedback on the different caterers and making it easy for them to select the right end caterer for their needs. And so they did they just had this idea from customer interviews and they did some A/B tests of different messaging, and they found that this had a really big impact on their conversion rate.
Yeah, I agree that the messaging is often overlooked in the early days, and the impact of getting it right is much higher than what founders usually expect. But this also relates to tone of voice, language, and even branding. In the last couple of years, we've seen a surge in the number of companies willing to invest in their branding early on. While before it was all about product, we'll figure out branding and design later. We now see more and more companies building their brand alongside the product. They almost see it as a key component of their go-to-market strategy, like a really important differentiator in a usually very crowded industry. So do you think that increased competition in almost any sector would fuel this trend even further? Should companies be thinking beyond getting the product right and thinking about building their brand early on?
So in general, I think it's very good if you're thinking about distribution, not just making your product in the beginning. But there's a couple questions like how much should a company focus on branding in general? And then when is the right time to think about it? Ultimately, the brand has to match the market and the need. Because you're going to have, there's luxury, there's like a B2B trust and security type brand. There's so many head and heart, there's so many angles you can go. So until you understand who are your customers, what are they trying to do, what do they care about, what are they worried about, what are they comparing you to, any brand work you do is going to be a guess.
Right.
So I think it's very important to understand who your customers are and why, what they're comparing you to and what it is you're kind of helping them do in their lives and what anxieties and doubts they have about products in this category before you can do a good job with branding. And sometimes the founder already knows this implicitly in their own head because they're building a product in a category that they've been working in for a long time. But that has to be clear on a piece of paper that you can give to all the designers and the writers and the marketers and everybody so that they can craft something based on the information that's in your head. So I'd say in that sense, too early is before you really understand who's excited about this product and who's going to use it. And then how much or how little to invest in branding. I mean, I think of that as a brand is a potential source of competitive differentiation for you. It's like a moat. Now, there are successful companies who have horrible branding, like Amazon, Walmart, Cisco, but they obviously have very successful businesses. But that's eBay, but that's because they have other things. They have very high switching costs. You can't rip out Cisco gear and completely rebuild your network hardware. They have network effects, like eBay and Amazon. They've already got so many customers and so much momentum. Walmart has a supply chain and price and distribution advantage. So, or maybe like a biotech company has intellectual property and patents that no one else can copy. So those are all good ways to defend a business. But if you're selling a product that anyone else can copy, where there's a bunch of players in the marketplace and you don't have any of these other moats, you're going to have to differentiate yourself based on brand. So that's where you see in categories where there's a lot of players, whether it's shoes or wristwatches or fast, FMCG, products on the shelf in a supermarket, branding is super important because you need some way to differentiate yourself in the market and keep your competitors out. So I would say, if you're early stage, if you're successful long-term, what's your competitive differentiator going to be? What's going to protect you from those competitors? What's your moat? And does it need to be brand building? And if so, then it's never too early to start thinking about how you're going to win people's trust and how you're going to stand out in a crowded marketplace.
Right. And when it comes to paid marketing, when do you think is the right time in the startup life cycle to invest more heavily in paid advertisement? I know this is a very broad question, but generally, when do you think companies should feel confident, okay, now is the time to put some money behind it?
So the first thing is paid marketing isn't always the best strategy for everybody. I mean, sometimes it's a good complement, but a company like Canva built their entire business around SEO. Dropbox built their entire business around referrals, and Slack around referrals and network effects. Salesforce built their entire business around B2B sales and outbound calling. So first, just ask yourself, is paid advertising going to be the best channel for us? How do you think about that? Well, if a lot of people are out Googling for things, like Canva, a lot of people were searching for birthday invitation design template, things like that. There's a lot of search volume, you're probably going to want to be buying search keywords. If your product is an impulse buy that nobody's looking for, but it's very visually compelling, then Facebook advertising is an obvious channel for you or Instagram, because people are scrolling through their feed, and if they see your cool new magic toothbrush and they know it looks way cooler than their toothbrush and it's only 40 quid because it's a toothbrush, then that's a perfect product for paid. So first is because like I said in the beginning, 90% of your results are going to come from 10% of the stuff you do. Most companies are only really going to get one or two channels working to drive most of their growth, and that's okay. So is paid the right channel for you or not? And then back to your main question, which is when do you invest? Well, I think you have to start testing early, and paid is a great way to do that. For $500, you can show 4 different ads to 2,000 people each on Facebook in a week and get very quick results on message testing. So it's good to start testing early, but the problem is people get to a point where it's like, this is kind of working, for every dollar we spend, we're getting like $1.30 in return after 6 months. But the unit economics aren't great, and they'll just keep putting more and more money behind it. That's a bad idea. You want to get to a point where the unit economics obviously make a lot of sense. I've worked with a company who spends $20 to get a customer, and within 3 months, that customer is reliably worth $100. So for those folks, borrow money, like as much money as you can put into that machine. That's a great idea, and you want to. So I'd say paid in the beginning as testing, and wait till the unit economics really make sense before you go whole hog and really pour money into it.
Right. Okay. So let's say I found my perfect acquisition channel. It
Yeah.
works brilliantly. It's repeatable. It's very predictable. So I know how much I'm getting from each pound I invest. The problem is, it is just one channel. Do you think this is a dangerous trap? Should I avoid it? And if so, how? Or do you think that's okay for early stage companies?
I mean, it does depend what stage you're at. But if you've got a single channel working, obviously, especially if it's a paid channel, algorithms change, spaces become more or less
Right.
competitive. It's all price based on auction, and you can get banned. you know.
Yeah.
So there's obviously all kinds of risks in being dependent on a single channel. That said, a lot of companies have gotten very, very big off of a single channel. Now, I guess I would say, I would think about it a few ways. I think about it instead of channels, but more like lanes. And this is an idea from a great article by a guy named Lenny Rachitsky. But a lane is going to be a group of channels that work similarly. So you can hire the same team and have the same expertise. So like paid traffic would be a lane, Facebook, Instagram would be a channel, native ads would be a channel, App Store advertising would be a channel, and Google Display Network would be a channel, all within that lane. So you're getting some diversification, but that expertise you build around good creative, good funnel optimization, good analytics and attribution, those skills and muscles are going to help you, capitalize on that channel. Now, the other thing to think about is if you go back to your customers and say, where are they getting information? How do people buy stuff in this category? And there may just be multiple places they look. Like with PayPal, some people were asking their web developer to figure out payments. So web developers became an important channel for us. Some people were getting it in their shopping carts. So shopping carts became an important channel for us. Some people were Googling online payments. So paid search and SEO became an important channel for us. So go to your customer and work backwards and say, where are they going to be looking and where are they going to find this product? And make sure that you turn up in all of those places.
Right.
But the mistake, I guess, sorry to ramble here, is I think people just sort of have a list of channels and they go through it like, oh, have you tried putting adverts on the tube yet? Have you tried trade shows yet? What about PR? And they just sort of do this random list of things you can spend money on, instead of starting with their customers and saying, where are these people finding products? And how can we turn up there?
Right. And this would narrow down your channels to just a few to start testing with, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And instead of just trial and error with everything. And when it comes to metrics and KPIs, what do you think is the biggest mistakes founders usually make?
So the biggest mistakes, there's two of them. One is just overthinking it and like just chasing too many different metrics all at once. I see people just moving in too many directions and no focus and constantly debating this number and that number. And the second one, and this is kind of weird, but it's obsessing about revenue too early. Now, the reason this is controversial is because it's a company, and of course it's supposed to make revenue.
Right.
But the problem is there's lots and lots and lots of ways to make revenue. What you need to do in the beginning is find product market fit. And so, for example, if I have a startup, the thing I could do to get revenue fastest is probably doing services for companies and doing a little custom coding and high upfront integration fees. But then suddenly I'm running a web development or a coding development shop, which is a great way to make money, but a horrible way to build a unicorn startup. So instead, what I say is focus on customer engagement, on getting and delighting and keeping customers in the first instance. And you see this, again, if you look backwards at any great startup, each one will have a North Star metric. And the North Star metric is not revenue. For Airbnb, it was nights booked. At PayPal, it was total payment volume. At Amazon, it was number of repeat purchases. At Facebook, it's daily active users. And these made sense in the very beginning, and they make sense now that they're giant corporations. And the thing is, if you can nail customer engagement, if Airbnb gets a lot of nights booked, if a SaaS company gets a lot of weekly active users, you can make money off of that. That's not hard at all. So the second big mistake is focusing on revenue instead of focusing on getting and delighting customers and customer metrics that will inevitably lead to revenue.
You mentioned product market fit, the most important topic for any startup, but very often the elephant in the room. I heard you saying, if you don't know if you have product market fit, you don't. And it sounds so logical. it's so obvious, right? But when you're a startup founder and you've reached the point where you're growing but not fast enough, you've got some traction, but deep down you know the economics are not quite right. You've raised some funding, you don't know when the next round will be, and you live in this intersection between life and death, and you don't know for how long this will continue. There are so many startups in this situation. As a founder, how do you know it's time to stop, reevaluate what you're doing, and maybe potentially give up on this venture? Are there any universal signals from your experience that founders should be looking for to help them make their decision if they're in this situation?
Most of the questions you've asked, I've thought through and I've got like an easy answer. This is a hard one because this is a very deeply personal question. And the journey to product market fit, it can be very long. Airbnb, I think, started in 2007 or 8, and they didn't really get product market fit for about 5 years. Notion, he started doing that in, I think, 2010 or 2012, right. And they really started taking off in like 2019. Slack, same thing. It started as a games company, and again, like 5 or 6 or 7 years to product market fit. So it's a long time, and it's a journey of indeterminate length. It's like you don't know when are things really going to start ticking over. So it's like you could be giving up right before you get there, or it could still be a long road ahead. So I think it's a very personal decision. I almost never see founders who have the intellectual honesty or emotional distance to walk away from a business. I find most people are just really, really committed to it. And then I see a lot of times where a company tries something and fails, and then someone else does it, right? Like how many social networks tried and failed, like MySpace and a bunch we've never heard of before Facebook absolutely nailed it. So I think, you've got to ask yourself, first of all, like any business is built on risky assumptions. And one of those risky assumptions is like, there's a lot of people out there who have this goal that we help people achieve. Like there's a lot of people out there trying to do the thing that we help people do. If the market just literally isn't out there, and we see that a lot, people have a really good business for a really small number of customers. Right. If the market's not out there, you can't fix that. You can't turn, lack of demand into demand. But assuming there is a market out there, I think like, why are you doing this? Ivan kept working on Notion for that long time because he was obsessed with, building this product. He's a product person. He loves doing this stuff. So, and he was happy in literally eating ramen and coding on his product all day. So like, why are you doing this? Is this really how you want to spend your life? And if not, then maybe it's time to think about how you do want to be spending your life. But as much as you can, if you don't have product market fit, you want to keep your burn rate low and your rate of learning and experimentation high, because again, you're on a journey of indeterminate length, and you're going to have to learn and do a lot of experimentation before you're going to find product market fit.
Right. So we live in an era where I think like everyone is trying to sell us convenience. We're kind of literally spammed with different offerings, like startups competing to bring me my groceries in 10 or 15 minutes, who's going to be faster, as if I need my groceries in 15 minutes. So I'm just curious, do you think this is sustainable? And also, where do you see the startup ecosystem, especially in Europe, progressing in the next decade or so? What do you think is going to be the next hype?
So the convenience thing, this is a very long trend. I mean, if you look back to ancient Rome, people got money so they could buy slaves to do the work for them so they wouldn't have to do work, right? Like, this isn't like a new thing. Microwavable TV dinners in the 80s. Now you can go online. You can buy electric scissors. You can buy a self-stirring coffee mug. I mean, people are literally too lazy to stir their coffee. So I don't think that's going to change. I think if you're building a business that makes people, even easier for people to just sit in their butts and do nothing all day, you've got a great business.
So I do need people to bring me my groceries in less than 10 minutes then. That is a real need.
Yeah, I think as long as you've got people with money, like people just, and it's not that people are inherently lazy. It's that people want to do the stuff that they want to do. They're excited about going and doing their thing, and they don't want to go do other stuff that is no fun for them. So, but, so that's a more generous interpretation. But in short, yeah, I would always bet on increasing convenience, no question. Other trends. So I guess when I look at the market, and I just sort of think about, where are there big incumbents who are making a lot of money and have a lot of unhappy customers? Where are there sort of gaps in the world? A couple that really jump out at me. One is the insurance industry. So, we've had fintech is an entire vertical now of companies that steal customers and money from banks, right?
Right.
And that's been going for 15 years now. And we see it in so many other verticals, restaurants and food delivery, and so many business-to-business functions are being replaced by SaaS. But people are still, for the most part, buying insurance policies from big old insurance companies. And if you look on Trustpilot, most of them have a lot of unhappy customers. And that's $1 trillion industry. Another one that's less like stealing and disrupting old industries, I guess the other one for B2C is mobile. Like if you look at, the Vodafone and EE and those guys, Virgin, they tend to have very low Trustpilot ratings, and they're still very popular and ubiquitous, and low cost and barriers to entry. Now, the other thing I think about is where is there no industry at all, and I see one growing, and the one there I'm most excited about is health tech.
Right.
Because, you've sort of got supplements and fitness and FMCG, products you'd buy in the health aisle of a supermarket. And then you've got super fancy biotech stuff. And I'm starting to see people are starting to take control in charge of their health. It used to be you just go to the doctor and the doctor tells you something and you do it. And the same thing, if you look at investing, it used to be a few people had, brokers and investment managers. And now you've got Robinhood and, robo-advisors, and everyone's taking charge of their own finances. And I think it's inevitable that's going to happen in health. And it's not just a few weird biohackers, but I think a lot of people are going to be wearing continuous glucose monitors. And, so when I was an investor, I invested in Thriva and a company called Second Nature. And I feel like there's a huge space between biotech and sort of FMCG of health tech that's going to be very popular and mainstream.
Yeah, and it's definitely been in the spotlight in the last couple of years. So totally agree with you. There is so much we could be doing. I mean, we are sending people on a holiday to space, but we can't deal with the pandemic, and we don't have the technology and the infrastructure to do it. So yeah, it's a huge challenge for all of us. And before I let you go, Matt, so you've analyzed obviously hundreds of startups, hundreds of stories. What would you say to our listeners who they think they have a great idea, they've got the skills, the capabilities to build it, they're really passionate, they believe in it? What are the first things to consider before quitting your job and embarking on the journey to build a startup? Other than paying the bills. Obviously, you have to pay the bills.
So I would say it's important to validate the idea. And by that I mean, validate that there's other people out there who actually want this thing. And the simplest ways to do that before you quit your job are just to put up a fake landing page for this imaginary product and go, spend $500 and buy some Facebook ads and send people to the landing page and see if they click buy. And if they click buy, just put them on your waiting list. Or if you've read the book, The Mom Test, you can do some interviews in a way that will validate, not just if people tell you, oh, that's a great idea, but if they'd be willing to pay for it. You can ask people, for example, if they have this problem and if they've tried to do something about this in the past. So there are lots of quick, lean ways, and what you want to validate is, are there people out there who have this struggle or this goal that they're struggling to achieve, and are they willing to take action and time and effort and money to achieve that goal? And there's lots of clever experiments and things you can do on the side hustle in your part-time to validate that. Even just as simple as doing keyword research and seeing if anyone's Googling this this challenge, how many people are Googling it, and what do the current results look like for that search?
Right, perfect. Thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you online?
So my website is startupcorestrengths.com, And there's a bunch of stuff on there, free stuff. I've written a book called Growth Hacking for Founders.
I highly recommend it.
Oh, thank you. Also, to your last question about just starting out, there's a startup marketing strategy template on there. So just sit down with a cup of coffee and we'll talk you through from first principles. These are all the things you need to think about as you're planning what you're going to build and what is your route to market. And I did it by actually going back to the original pitch decks of like Uber, LinkedIn, TransferWise. So first of all, you can see how to write a good pitch deck, but also you can kind of see what their thinking was at each step of the way and apply the same sort of process to your startup. So those are both on my website, startupcorestrengths.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. Wish you all the
Sure
best.
thing, Desi. Great chatting to you.
The Product Show is brought to you by Pony, a design studio helping startups and scale-ups build and optimize their digital products at speed. Check pony.studio to learn more.